You listen to EKKE's podcasts, produced by the National Center for Social Research of Greece. The workshop, Far-Right Extremism and Democracy in a Comparative Perspective, Europe and Latin America, took place in Athens, 11 to 13 September 2024, and was organized by the European Consortium for Political Research, Standing Groups Extremism and Democracy and Latin American Politics, EKKE and Panteion University. On the sidelines of the workshop, EKKE's podcasts recorded the thoughts and ideas of several participants. 4 thought-provoking questions were raised during the workshop's opening day. Is the far right a global phenomenon? What is causing it? What are the implications for democracy? What can we learn from comparing Europe and Latin America? These were also the focus of EKKE's podcasts, where our guests presented their ideas and arguments.
We now give the floor to Talita Tanscheit, Assistant Professor at Alberto Hurtado University in Santiago, Chile.
I'm Talita Tanscheit, and I'm an assistant professor in Chile at Alberto Hurtado University, but I'm also Brazilian. I'm working in Chile, but I'm Brazilian. I'm mainly studying the relationship between political parties and democracy in Latin America. Nowadays we have a laboratory in Chile. It's called Laboratory for the Study of the Far Right. We are doing research on the far right in Latin America from a comparative perspective. I think that you interviewed also Cristóbal Rovira Chaltwasser and Carlos Melendez, and we are working together on this project. This window that we are hoping to open here in Greece is related to a comparison that we want to make between Latin America and Europe, relying in the studies that we have done recently about Latin America. First thing, and I don't know if they talked about it before, is that we are talking about a global phenomenon and that no country, no region is immune to the far right anymore, because in the past we used to think that the far right was an European phenomenon. But for almost, 6 years now, we could see like the spread of the far right to many parts of the world, and specifically talking about Latin America, we could see it in Latin America with Bolsonaro's victory in 2018, and then with Nayib Bukele's victory in El Salvador. He is the most successful one in Latin America, and he could be re-elected easily. Bolsonaro could not. And with Milei in Argentina now. And I think another thing important here to learn is that the far right in general has a very conflictive relationship with democracy. But the ideology of the far right, even if it's radical, it changes depending on the context. So if you have this nativist thing here in Europe, it's not the debate that we are having in Latin America, where we are pretty much talking about moral conservatism and penal punitivism. I mean, about moral issues and about tough on crime issues. So we can see similarities, but because our contexts and our legacies and patterns are so different, we also have different ideologies being operated, even if these ideologies are both radical ideologies. I think that there is one thing that is important, is that we are talking about the far right as a new phenomenon now in Latin America, but it's not new. This type of far right that is new now, because Latin America has a very strong history of military dictatorships or of fascist systems, right? We had fascism in many countries of Latin America. Even in Brazil, you had a dictator president that was democratically elected, but then was an autocracy. He was the person that built the Brazilian state as we know this state now. His name is Getúlio Vargas, and he was connected with fascism in Europe, and he had many fascist policies. But this new kind of far right, I think it's crucial to understand Trump, to talk about it. But specifically talking about the case of Brazil, yes, it's about Trump, but I think it's even more global than Trump. Because Bolsonaro and the Brazilian far right, for example, they have strong ties with Poland, strong ties with Hungary, so it's not only about Trump. Bolsonaro travels regularly to Hungary, and he's really close to Orban. So I think that what they are trying to make is like a global network of the far right, that of course also because we are in the same continent, of course that there is this exchange between Bolsonaro and Trump, but they are also prioritizing another regions. And Orban is really important to understand. First, because he is a successful case of the far right. He has been in power for so long now that he could implement things that Trump couldn't in the US and Bolsonaro couldn't in Brazil because they were not re-elected. So I think that Orban is a whole model about to where the far right can go and what the far right needs to do to be successful. And I'm talking about this process of democratic erosion because Hungary no more is a democratic country, I think we can say it, right? It's a competitive authoritarian regime, but he influenced Bolsonaro, for example, a lot in these moral issues that I was talking previously, because you see crusade against women's rights and LGBTI rights in Hungary that are really strong. And if you also see this Geneva Consensus, do you know it? It's an articulation of far-right leaders and parties within the United Nations and pretty much regarding abortion. So it's like an articulation of leaders that want to ban abortion or to put much more restricted laws on abortion, that it was like idealized by Orban, okay? And if we see like the political network for values, Cast now, the leader of the Chilean far right, is the president of this network now, but it was like created, the mentor of this political network for values was Orban and the far right in Hungary. One of the first measures of Lula when he came back to power on 2023 was to take Brazil off from this consensus. So Brazil is no longer participating on it, but Bolsonaro was a very important person for this forum, especially because Brazil is the most important country in Latin America. I think we can say it economically, politically, in population, territory, everything. I was telling you that nativism is the main thing here, right? And in Latin America, it is moral conservatism. So what the far right there pretty much connected to the evangelicals in Latin America, because the Catholics lost power in Latin America, and now we are having the evangelical church becoming really important there, especially concerning politics. So for example, in Brazil, where abortion is allowed, and in Chile as well, in some circumstances, the far right is trying to make abortion forbidden, even under these three circumstances and these exceptions. And the far right in Brazil and in Latin America is also against same-sex marriage, for example. And if you think in the case of France, for example, where half of the far right voted for the constitutionalization of abortion a few months ago, it's impossible to think that even one far-right leader or one far-right person would vote for a measure like that in Latin America. I was also thinking about another thing, is that I don't know if you have heard about gender ideology. It's the main discourse of the Latin American far right. They are saying that there is a gender ideology that is trying to impose a kind of behavior in Latin American people. So using this idea of gender ideology, they are trying to prohibit abortion, same-sex marriage, adoption by gay couples, but they are always also trying to ban sexual education from the schools. This is a really important thing there. And they are also trying to impose Christian education in schools. And I'm talking about public. Okay, so they are also trying to deal with children there and with education, etc. We can see the decline of the Catholic Church in Latin America, because the Catholics used it to be really important in Latin America, but they are declining. In some countries, because the Catholic Church was involved with huge scandals of sexual harassment, etc. It's the case of Chile and Argentina, for example. But it doesn't mean that Latin American people are becoming less religious. So there is a correlation between the decline of the Catholic Church and the importance of the Evangelical Church. And the new Evangelical Church, we call it Neo-Pentecostalism, with a much more fluid kind of organization where you can build a church everywhere, because they don't have this vertical organization as the Catholic Church has, so they don't have to be accountable to anybody. In Brazil, it's funny because, for example, you have places that operate as schools or even as restaurants during the day that are churches during the night, and where you can marry. It's much more flexible as well. The language that they speak is much more easy. They decided it's something new, because evangelicals have always been present in Latin America, and actually they were really important in the opposition to the dictatorship in many Latin American countries. But somehow this is one thing that political scientists in Brazil are trying to understand, because there was a moment of conversion of evangelicals when they decided to participate on politics and to interfere in the state. It wasn't like that. It's something of the last, 20 years maybe. We don't know the cause of this change within the evangelical church. We don't know the causal mechanism, we would say it in political science. We don't know why they did it.